All right, so we're glad that you guys made it. Now, there are people that are online, but I'm just going to talk to you guys. And so we call this Marriage Foundation. And Steph and I have done this for couples that we've married. How many years? We should have added it up. I think it's like 20 years.
Long time.
About 20 years. And so we've changed it over time. And we've changed it to this format. So right now, you're having dinner and a date. And so the intention is there's a reason we do this. And there's a reason why we want the people that are watching this to also participate in a date. Like, we don't want them just sitting around the couch and doing this, because to do a date, as you know, takes effort. You've got to be intentional. And the longer you're married, it can start to feel like a hassle. Like, oh, I got to do this. Why don't we just stay in and watch a movie? But then that kind of creates this pattern where the marriage is kind of getting the leftovers. And so we want you to get in that habit of having a date night, because it takes work. It's almost like working out. And sometimes you're really excited about it. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes your friendship is really good. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have money. Sometimes you don't. Money's not important. How you feel is not important. It's the intentionality behind it. And so that's why we want you in this six-week session to get in the habit of having a weekly date. Maybe you already have it, maybe you don't, maybe you used to have it, maybe you faded out, but we want you to do it because you need it. We need it. And we have seasons when we're in the rhythm and seasons where we're not. The other reason we do it this way, we used to have it like in a small group where everybody was circled up, and we did some exercises that were really good and really powerful, but we know that a lot of people didn't participate because of their fears. They had the fears that they were going to have to share with the other couples of what they were going through, and so a lot of them would edit what they were thinking, or they just wouldn't participate. And then the other fear was the fear that your spouse is going to say something that you don't want your spouse to say about you or the marriage or whatever. And so that's why we do it in this format, so that you can go out and have a date. We've gone to some great marriage conferences, but the pattern we've known in a lot of them is that you don't have much time with your spouse. So you're listening and you're listening and you're listening, and then you leave. So the emphasis is we are only planning on sharing a little bit, and then letting you take what we share or the exercises we give you and then use it. So that's the plan for this. So to start, since this session is on communication, we're going to give you a quiz. You're not going to share the quiz with us, but just there. And if someone's watching this online, or if it was sent to them, they can we will show you how to get access to all of these materials. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to pause for about 5 minutes and just give you the quiz, and you will do it at your own thing. The communication, this quiz is called the communication quiz, but communication, what we mean by it for this session, is that you know your spouse. Not how you communicate, but knowing them. And the only way you're going to know them is by understanding communication. And it's a lot more than words. There's the nonverbal communication. There's the communication when you're not even with them, where you see patterns so that you can understand them. So we'll pause right here for about 5 minutes or so, and just choose a few of these questions. You don't have to go through them all, and have fun with it. It's not supposed to be super serious. So don't get in a fight over the quiz. You can get in a fight later. All right, let's pause. So the quiz is meant to be fun, and I borrowed it from a couple different places and just chose questions I thought were good. But the reason I asked you those is you want to get to the point where you can go through this quiz or a quiz like it, and you just know your partner. You know about them. I think one of the most important things about communication in a marriage is that you stay curious. Don't assume you know. It's a constant changing dynamic. You're going to change, your partner's going to change, and the marriage is going to change. And of course, all the situations around you are going to change. And so you need to stay curious because they change. For example, Steph and I were looking at it, and her breakfast, this is a simple one, it's changed so many times. It used to be eggs all the time, 24/7. Then it became, I can't remember some of the other ones, but now it's like these gross green smoothies, but it's what she loves. So it's that idea of not just noticing, but being curious. And so this session, like I said, is on communication, getting to know your partner, but we want to give you tools because you need to know them from here on out because it's going to keep changing. It's not like you get to know them, okay, got that, check it off the list. Some of the other sessions that we're going to go through are big ones that are usually addressed in premarital counseling. But you're going to need these all the time through your marriage. And so we're giving you everything digitally so that you can refer back to it. We used to hand out these notebooks, but we all know how those notebooks go. They just end up somewhere and you never look at them again. And that may be the same for these digitally, but we want to hand you tools that you can use. So at the end of this session, we're going to give you another tool that we want you to keep and that you will practice with each other, getting to know each other. And getting to know each other so that you can love the other person. So let me just give you some heads up on where we're headed with some of the sessions. This is communication. Then we're going to do one on conflict resolution. You will get in conflict. That's okay, but how do you deal with that? We'll deal with sex. We're not going to call it intimacy or something. We're going to call it sex. We will be open and honest with you, which is also a little scary since it's up here online. But we want to give you tools and encouragement because it's such an important part of a marriage. Money, which comes up often. In fact, as you've heard often, sex and money are two of the largest impacts on a marriage. And so we have to deal with that. We have to give you tools so that you can work on that. Family of origin, which means how your family affects your relationship with each other. And it affects you and how you react. And then spiritual formation. Are you heading in the same direction spiritually? Where do you want to be as a couple? What do you want for your family? So those are the areas we're going to be going. But you need to probably know a little bit more about us. So we're going to share briefly how we met. And we'll go back and forth. We didn't script any of this because we want to keep it as honest as possible. But we've also done this a lot. So I'm Boogie, and this is Steph. And I remember when I first laid eyes on Steph, I was at a basketball game. I'd graduated college. And
I don't actually think you even knew who I was, though, that time.
No, I didn't. But that's when I met you.
Yeah, but...
The question is how we met. You can answer it the way you want to answer it.
I start.
Okay, go ahead. Fire away.
We were at we were at a basketball game, which I never went to. Those, because I was waitressing and trying to get through college. But I had a call off. I was a call-in waitress that night. My shift got called off, so I went to this game with all my floor mates. And one of the girls that was cheerleader was actually being set up with Boogie. And she asked if I would go and talk to him because she wasn't really sure how to start the conversation because she didn't know him very much at all. And I just remember thinking about his name and being like, whatever, okay, sure, whatever. I'm easy to talk with anyone. So we started talking. I walked up there with her to kind of start them in a conversation. It's
important for people to know. I did not know I was being set up. I saw this girl walk up that I knew, and she brought her friend.
So we just started talking, and that's how we met, really. It was just my girlfriend being set up with him. And after the conversation was over, he's like, "Nice to meet you, Sherry." And I'm like, my name's Stephanie, but it was really nice meeting you, too. Not a very major impression at all, but, it was great.
So we met, and I had a huge impression on her, as we can see. But for a few days, I couldn't stop thinking about her. And so I called a friend and tried to figure out a way to meet her, and we came up with all these dumb ideas. In fact, I remember one in particular where he said, "Hey, I'll meet you we'll go get a burrito, and I'll just bring her there, and you'll just happen to walk in." And it just started getting so manufactured. that I said, just give me your number. So I called her up. She did not. She answered actually her friend answered the phone and knew she would say no. So she put the phone down, took Stephanie out in the hallway, and she pushed you up against the wall, right?
Well, she just was like, you need to say yes. I forgot to tell you something.
On our friendship, you need to say yes. So
Yes.
she didn't
She's
want
like,
to.
Please, just
She almost
say
broke
yes.
the date off several times, and we ended up going. I asked her out on a date. I was speaking at the college for a group that we'd started called Surf and Serve, and so she would just meet me there, which, by the way, happened to be Valentine's Day.
Super awkward.
But that was your fault. It was the only day you said you could make it.
I didn't
I
realize
gotta
it. And
work,
then
I
looked
gotta
at the
hang out
calendar
with
and
friends.
I was like, crap.
Yeah, right back at you.
Yeah.
So
Super awkward.
they're walking forward, and there's nothing there yet, because as she's walking forward, there's two girls walking forward. I was like, oh no, which one is it? Because we just met briefly, but there was something on my heart. There was something where I wanted to be with this girl again. So it wasn't based on looks, obviously, because as they're walking forward, I couldn't remember which one it was. And then she walked forward, and I was like, okay, that's her. So, and from that point on, our relationship just kind of went together. In fact, probably one of the most important things for me is that I realized prior to this that I didn't know what I was doing in finding a wife. Mm-hmm. And so I just started praying. I found Proverbs 31, which is a psalm, proverb, I mean, of a mom. See, you got me all nervous right now just sitting next to you. A mom giving guidance to her son on the type of wife to look for. And so I'd prayed over that for quite some time, at least over a year. And so when I met Steph, it was like I recognized her because I was prepared, because I was praying. And so there were all these attributes. And when I met Steph, I'm like, that's her. And so that began our journey to get married. We've been married now for, you want to try this?
25 years. That's an easy number to remember. It's 5.
In a relationship, it's usually the girl that knows the time and the guy doesn't, but it's opposite with us. So 25 years of marriage as of this last April. And there's been a lot of ups and downs, as you guys are going to experience. There was a lot of things that we thought were going to happen that didn't happen. A lot of things that we never thought would happen did happen. So it is truly an adventure, and it constantly is changing. And so what we want to do in this session of communication is set you up for those times of transition, to walk through them together. So we're going to pause right now for a few minutes, but we want you to answer this question. When you met, and you can even go over some of the details if you want, but what attracted you to the other person? What was it that stuck out to you? Maybe it didn't hit you till later. So for example, Steph didn't want to go out with me. Then she went out with me. Then she didn't want to go out with me. And
yeah, it took me a little while to get used to it. I was just, my heart had been set on something that I thought God was calling me to, and it wasn't marriage. And so when we started building like a relationship, and I saw like his heart for the Lord, and he was really in pursuit in like a good way, but just really
hot pursuit.
Kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but he was very intentional, and I felt like the Lord really worked on my heart as we built our relationship together, and made it really clear to me, like, are you following me? If you're following me, then I'm leading you in this direction. This is exactly what you need. This is the family that you need. And so for me, marriage was much different, or the beginning parts. It had a lot to do with what God was calling me to be, and I felt like he was calling me to be a wife. And in doing that, I knew that there was some things that I was going to have to do with myself to be able to love him the way that he needed to be loved. And so it was definitely a process, and it continues to be every day. It's just a lot of that whole idea of like, it's not about me. It has a lot more to do with how I want to love him to be a more godly man and love others.
So we want you to go back to that moment, because even though it's going to continue to change, it's important to always go back to where it started, because there's something powerful in that moment. And so for right now, go back to when you first met and talk about what attracted you to the other person, or what clicked. All right, go ahead. So it's important to understand what a marriage is. And that sounds weird, but you all in your mind have an idea of what a marriage is, what the purpose of it is. But if you don't aim at anything, you're going to hit it every time. You ever heard that phrase? And so if you don't know the purpose of marriage, you're just kind of floating. And so I want to share what I believe is the purpose of marriage, primarily from Scripture and primarily from Jesus. So in Genesis 2, God says that a man will leave his father and mother and will be joined to his wife, and they will become one. And so not only is it in Genesis, but then Jesus repeats it to say this is what it is. And in that, there's some key words that you're going to leave. So there is a leaving of other things, because the priority is going to be your spouse, even when you have kids. Because when you have kids, it's so easy to focus on the kids and pour everything into them. But the greatest gift that you can give your kids is each other. So it's not like you're taking away from your family or taking away from your kids or your friends. You're joining to each other so that you can be more for them. So leaving, joining, and that's much more than a physical joining, but it's a joining of everything. Everything you have is each other. So it's not like, hey, I checked your bank account. Did you mess with my bank account? Hey, what are you doing with my car? Hey, that's my recliner chair. Like, you don't own anything. You're joined. It's all together. So there's that joining, and that means
like
all
crazy bee. Sorry.
that means all the pain and everything comes with it. And then you become one. And that's much deeper than we can explain now, but there is a oneness that happens. So you need to know what that is, because there's competing purposes. For example, some people they may not say it, but they're acting on this. Sometimes it's they just don't want to be alone. And so they'll get married just to not be alone. Sometimes it's for financial reasons. Sometimes it's for security or stability. Sometimes people will get married just because they think that if they get married, then they're going to be happy. So they're expecting their spouse to provide this for them, but that's not a good way to enter into a marriage. You're coming to give. If you have an expectation they're going to complete you and fix you, that's not going to happen. And remember, you're leaving and you're joining. So whatever you've got that's sad, that's coming in. And the same for them, just so you know. They're just as much of a mess as you are. And so you're all coming together in that. So there's all these competing purposes, sometimes just to have children. But that's not what marriage is for. Marriage is to leave, to join, and to become one. But even though you may know the purpose of marriage, it's going to change over time, meaning the way you, not the purpose of it, but the way you approach it. And so a lot of what we stole, we came up with our own plan on how to do this Marriage Foundations. And then there was another group in England called the Marriage Course. So good. So we did that when we could all meet together. And one of the things that they said that I thought was so important was that a marriage is like tending a garden, which is appropriate for right now since we're in the backyard, because that's our garden. And we just went away on a trip we went up to the mountains with our family and met up with some other friends. So we're only gone for a week. And I've been pretty thorough, I'm trying to water it all the time. It was very important, the soil. I would pull off this pruning, especially on the tomatoes. They're called these little suckers, which are leaves that pop up in between breaks in the branches, and they're not needed. So you got to pull those out so that everything goes where it's supposed to go, so it'll produce fruit. So we're gone for a week, and it's untended. And I come back, and I had these 2 large tomatoes from this one vine that I really wanted to try because I've never had it before. And some birds or something came down, they got to it, it was filled with bugs, and it was just gross. And then things had fallen over, and my peppers had tipped over, and so I had to go and I had to prune, I had to rip it all up. But that's what a marriage is like. If it's untended for a short period of time, don't be surprised. But it can be taken care of. It's not like, oh, the garden's toast, we're done. No, it's a growing, living thing, and it can be worked with. And so here's some examples in your marriage how you can tend to your marriage. So the first one is when you start. So for all of you, you're in the beginning really of your relationship for the most part. And how you start is so important. And so, for example, with this particular garden, the year before it had not done so well. It was a dying garden. And my kids actually made fun of me going, "You're really going to do this again? Last year was so bad. Why are you even trying?" So I had to bet my oldest kid that we were going to produce a lot of fruit. So I always take him out to show him, to rub it in his face. And so one of the things that we had to do, though, was really pour a lot of effort into the soil. And then, of course, the water system. And then I learned that, especially for certain plants, you've got to put them deeper. So if like the dirt, when you get it, is here and you're replanting it, you got to take the dirt up even higher. So there's all these little tricks and things you have to do, but it's all part of tending the garden. So where you start is so important. And so for you in the marriage, what are the priorities? What is going to bring life to your marriage? You know most of these things. I don't need to go through the list. But there's so many things, like, for example, this date night that we talked about. That's a great starting point. All those areas that we're going to cover: money, sex, family of origin, spiritual formation, conflict resolution. Those are great things to know ahead of time, because there will be seasons when there's a storm that's going to rip up your garden, whether it comes from you, whether it comes from outside you. And so you're going to want to have all of these things in place. And then when it comes to pruning, well, I kind of already explained that one, right? Things just, they grow all over the place. They choose where they're going to grow, these different plants. And it's the same in your marriage. It's just going to go in different directions. So you've always got to be able to step back and take a look at it so that you can tend it. There's going to be things that grow in your marriage, maybe resentment, maybe usually it's busyness. I mean, that's one of the key problems in a marriage, is just having too many other things you're trying to do. And so it pulls you away from each other. Or you're doing some good things, but you're doing too many good things, and you need to choose the best over the good. Those are decisions you have to make. That's all part of tending the garden. You've got to come back to them over and over again. We do this because we want to help other couples, but there's also an element of selfishness. Because every time we go through this, I get to tend our marriage. Steph gets to do it. We get to be reminded and go through it. And it's always helpful. As I was prepping this week, I thought about all the things that have grown up, all the things that need to disappear. The last element, and I'll let Steph share a little bit on this one, is support. So I just learned this. I love hot peppers. Jalapenos. I don't like that flavor as much, but she loves those, so I grow those for her. Fresno, Anaheim, Poblano. I could go on and on. But I've never grown them before. Just like, when it comes to marriage, this is your first marriage with each other. This is your first with you. And so as I'm doing this, I find out that they will tip over. Like I said earlier, well, I didn't see that one coming. And then when I read up on it, it said, yeah, you need to put them in some kind of a cage so they have that support. So a lot of the garden is going to need that support. When you go to a vineyard, they need that support. The vines will just be lying on the ground. And so with each other, you have to be a support for the other person. They need you to be. And you need to realize you need them to be your support as well. Steph is really good at this. So what would you say that looks like in a marriage?
Well, I think, honestly, for me, like for us as a couple, like we had to start doing work right even before we got married. We both had to work on like how we were going to communicate. We went through counseling and I think too, we both found like a really solid confidence in knowing that God loves us and we love God. And I think that helped a lot, because sometimes you get into marriage and all of a sudden you realize, like, first of all, you realize it's not all about you. And then you realize how important it is to serve each other. And that takes some really hard decisions sometimes, some sacrifices of things that are ideas or expectations that you think it should be one way when it might go the other way. And if you aren't able to communicate with each other and talk to each other, it can get really like bitter and angry and divisive. And so I think from the very beginning, it was just a really intentional effort to like talk things through. And I personally had a really hard time with this because my personality would be to just not talk about it and just keep on serving and loving and doing these things that I think are the right things. But like within me would just grow like bitterness or weeds or whatever you want to call it if you were talking about a garden. And so I think it's super important at the very beginning to know what your soil needs and to be able to express that and how you would like to be tended to as well as your partner. And communication is huge. It's like, I think it's the really huge foundation for the soil or whatever your marriage that you're growing together. So how do you do that? Like how do you make sure that your voice is heard and that their voice is heard and that you don't grow, I would say bitterness and anger are the two things. And I think it's something that you have to do daily. I mean, it's just like your relationship with the Lord. It's like, it's a daily commitment. It's a daily check of, am I really listening? Am I really understanding? Am I really loving? And making sure that my partner knows his importance. And then am I also voicing things that are bugging me that we could work together to make better? So it's definitely a process. And just like that garden, I mean, it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. But I do think it's a really great thing. Like, it's a really beautiful thing, and it's a really like life-filling thing to be able to be in a marriage where you feel open to communicate and share your heart's desires and then have a response of support in that.
I like what Steph said about communication, is that communication, the reason it's so important is because your job in marriage is to love your partner. Remember, you're not coming to get something, you're coming to give. And so to give to them, you've got to understand them. I mean, another way to look at it is that look at them as like a pepper plant. Like, you're doing whatever you can to make sure they can thrive. And if they're thriving, then they'll be more set free to love you. But you don't do it to get something back. You do it because that's what you're committing to. When you're deciding to get married, you're making a promise that you're going to tend. So it's easy to say the marriage, like it's this thing that floats above you. But to make it more personal, I'm here to tend her, to care for her. And just like with plants, you kind of don't know right away. You got to figure it out. You have to be a student. So you have to be a student of your partner, of your spouse. Because if you're going to love them, how can you do that if you don't know them? And the only way you can know them is through curiosity and through that intentionality of getting to know them as they continue to change. So you're not just giving them eggs in the morning, but you're also going, oh, you want this gross green smoothie? So it's all an element of how can I love you better? And so what we want you to do right now, this is your question. We're going to pause. And the question is, what struggle are you going through right now? And then your partner should be asking, how can I support you in this? How can I be there? You're not here to fix it. That makes sense? You can't go in and prune stuff out of their life, which happens all the time in marriage. I'm going through this, I'm going through that. Oh, you know what you should do? No, that's not what they need. How can you support them? And let them fill that in. All right? Take 5 to 10 minutes and answer that question. So when it comes to communication, probably the most helpful tool that Steph and I received was from a book written by Dr. Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages. Now, you've probably heard about it, or even if you haven't, it's always good to be reminded. So just before we pulled you back together, Steph and I were going back through the list because this list of 5 areas of how you or your spouse is best loved or likes to love. That's important to know. It's not just how you feel most loved or how they feel most loved, but also it's usually the way you express love. And they're probably not going to match up. So what we'll do is we're going to go through these 5 love languages briefly, and then we will go through some of the nuances of those. So, for example, the first one is words of affirmation. And the reason I'm starting with that one is because that's one of mine. Now, all 5 of these are amazing. So it's not like you're like, I'm not really into gifts. I mean, you probably would like it, but that doesn't mean you feel loved that way. It might be from your family of origin. It may be something you've adapted to. But for me, words of affirmation are huge. And what that means is it's not the actions, but I've held on to words that Steph has said of encouragement, like they're treasure. Like I want to be reminded when I start feeling bad about myself or I'm worried about our marriage, I remember things that she said. I remember notes that she's written. I remember times when she has said in different ways, you are the only person I'd want to be with you. You are an amazing husband. And she'll give me details and I soak it up. In fact, if I could get her to keep going, I would make her keep going because I feel so loved by that. So words of affirmation, there's some of you that's the best way that you feel loved. All 5 of these are great, but 1 or 2 are going to rise to the surface. And we want you to identify for yourself what those 1 or 2 are. And then more importantly, you're going to need to learn what it is for your spouse. So that's a brief description of words of affirmation. You want to hit acts of service?
Acts of service is one of mine. And this isn't just like a honey-do list. It's more like noticing things that would be helpful for your partner, even before they even know that they might be in need. Just little things like, I don't know. I know that she really likes this kind of ice cream, so I'm going to grab it at the store and bring it home. Or I see some flowers on the side of the road or whatever. And it's just it's a conscious effort to make sure that you know what they love, and you want to make sure that that's a part of that, like their life or whatever that day, like a surprise or like just it could be anything that's they're passionate about, and you make an effort to bring that home, or it's just like a small detail, but it becomes like a really big detail.
So for her 2 are acts of service and receiving gifts. So she's mixing the 2 a little bit at times.
Sort of. Oh, you're right.
So for
guess.
acts of service, this is at least what I try to do because I know it's how she feels loved. So last night, my kids, they want to be out late. It drives me crazy, and it drives her crazy. And then we get to that point where neither of us want to go do it. And then there's a big pile of dishes, and neither of us wants to do that. And so I'll be there in that moment going, I know that this is an act of service. I know she's going to feel loved by it. I don't want to do this, but I'll do it because I know she's loved. Now, if I do it and go, oh, look, see, I'm loving you, or what, you don't want to do that, then it wipes the whole love part out of it. Or even picking up the kids late at night because she just wants to kind of just sit and decompress. So there's all, vacuuming, I don't think that's one of her big ones, but you need to understand what it is. If your partner has acts of service as a language of love for them, you've got to learn that language. If you were getting married to someone and they spoke French and you spoke German, you better learn that language. You better learn their language. And that's what these are. These are languages, and they're difficult to learn because they don't make sense to you. For example, acts of service, not mine. And the next one, receiving gifts. I like getting things, but it is definitely not the way I feel most loved.
So that one's mine. This is also really important. I think Bill was going to share it anyway, but you typically, I guess I'll talk about the gifts and we'll talk about
However you want.
but usually like your gifts or their gifts are the hardest ones for you to give. I don't know why it's like that, but it just is. And so Boog could care less about receiving gifts, but it's the one and he doesn't really enjoy giving them either as much. But I really like receiving them. And this isn't like diamond rings and earrings and clothes and things like that. But
Although those aren't bad.
yeah, those are great. Those are fabulous. But it's a thoughtful thing where they really think about things that you like. So I guess I kind of confused acts of service. But it's just an intentional thought of something that they love and making the sacrifice to do it for them. I guess that's it pretty much.
So, for example, words of affirmation is what I want the most. It's probably one of the hardest things for Steph to do. And when it comes to gifts, I'm like, wow, why would she want this? It doesn't even matter. Because it doesn't matter to me, so why should it matter to her, correct? That's not how this works. And I think that the reason that most likely, because this happens, I don't know if we've had too many couples where they share the same top two.
A couple have that receiving gifts.
Yeah, maybe
as
one, yeah.
They really like gifts.
Although I don't think that particular couple understood gifts.
Yeah,
I
you're
think they
right,
just like
maybe.
nice stuff.
Yeah.
But it's going to be hard. And I think God set that up because, as we said with marriage, it's work. None of this, if it came easy, it wouldn't be as valuable. So God must have had a plan with it because this is how he's doing it. The next one is quality time. Now, for us, we enjoy quality time. It's not one of our top ones, but for some of you, this is the one. And I know plenty of couples we've worked with where one of them, this is so important. Sometimes it's with the husband, sometimes it's with the wife, but it's this great desire. Like, I want you to want to be with me. Not just, oh, you spent some time with me, but you wanted to. You went out of your way to do it because you knew it meant something to me. So if you do it and you're grumbling, it doesn't count. It's understanding how valuable and tender it is to your partner. And so you do whatever you can to learn that language and give them the time, because for every person, quality of time is a little bit different. It might not be sitting on the couch. Quality time might be, I want us outdoors. And you're thinking, oh, it's really hot out there. Or they're really into physical activity and you're a slug. Whatever that is, it's most likely going to be work to love them. It's never going to come easy. And this is so important to learn because you may go, oh, we're just not compatible because you don't match up. No, you're compatible because you don't match up. And so often what happens with couples is they enter in thinking they know the purpose of marriage is for them to be happy. They're not happy, so this must not be the right person. I need to go find someone else. That's not how this works. And the last one is one of my top two, and it's physical touch. Now, this doesn't mean sex. Physical touch, what it means is it could be, we have some very good friends, and the wife loves to cuddle. Likes to cuddle in there. Now, that's not me. Like, I love physical touch, but the cuddling thing isn't really the thing. But for some, it's that. Some, it's like sitting in their laps. Sometimes it's just, let's hold hands. I have one friend who shared something beautiful that stuck out to me. He said his dad, every time he came home, made a conscious effort to go over to his wife, my friend's mom, to just touch her in some way or another. Just touch the back of her head, touch her shoulder, touch her booty. I don't know, just always would make some kind of physical touch with her because he knew that she felt loved that way. And so he developed that rhythm. And so, when I'm sitting somewhere and I'm leaning forward or something and Steph puts her hand on my back, it's like an electrical charge that goes through me. And I just feel loved. So that's what physical touch is. So, this is your homework. We're not going to do it right now, but this is your homework. First off, you have to discover your spouse's love language. That's most important. Sure, it's great to know what yours is, but more importantly, what is your spouse's or your partner's love language? They may not even know it yet, but that's why it's homework. So all this week, you're working on trying to figure out what it is. And of course, once you figure out what it is, or at least think you have an idea, start doing it. Going out of your way, even if it's clunky and it's obvious. You want to be a little careful with the gifts. I don't know what your budget is right now, how finances are looking. But gifts don't always have to be something you go to a store and buy. And for your partner, they're going to kind of show you what that is. So you have to give your spouse permission to ask these questions. They're not supposed to automatically know what it is. I know that's a joke we see often in movies with, you should already know, I shouldn't have to tell you. No, that's not the way this works. You need to tell them. You may not know yet, so this is part of a discovery for you as you figure out, oh, I thought it was words of affirmation, but really I think it's quality time. And you'll be able to figure out when you feel loved, and a lot of times when you're irritated or getting angry or disappointed, it's because you're not being loved in a language that you understand. So that's your homework. And then next week, we're going to focus on conflict resolution. And we'll give you the homework for next week. All right, let's pray for you guys. Father, marriage is good, but it's tough. So we ask that you would use this time, that you would give everyone that's a part of this the tools they need. Maybe they're tools we're providing, maybe they're tools outside of us, but show us how to work on these relationships. Give us a picture of what marriage can be. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.